My name is Evelyn, and I am 29 years old. For the past 7 years, I've dedicated my life to caring for my grandmother, Martha, whose mind was slowly being stolen by dementia. While my cousins were building careers and families, I was managing medications, pureeing food, and holding her hand through sundown confused terrors. My family called me a saint, a selfless angel. But when my grandmother passed away and her will was read, their praise turned to poison. They discovered she had left me her entire seaside cottage estate, a property worth millions. They called me a thief, a manipulator who took advantage of a confused old woman. But what they don't know is that Grandma Martha left me something else, too. Her journals. Decades of them, and in those pages lies a secret about our family's perfect patriarch, my grandfather, that is about to burn their world to the ground. If you're watching this right now, drop a comment letting me know where you are viewing from. Before I tell you about the secret that changed everything, hit like and subscribe to hear more true stories about family betrayals and the explosive power of truth. Before the diagnosis, my life was on a completely different track. I had just graduated with a degree in landscape architecture, with a promising internship lined up in a prestigious firm 3 states away. I had a small apartment, a serious boyfriend, and a future that seemed bright and neatly planned. My grandmother, Martha, was my favorite person in the world. She was a vibrant, witty woman who smelled of salt water and lavender. Her small, charming cottage, perched on a cliff overlooking the ocean, was my childhood heaven. While my parents were busy with their demanding careers, Grandma Martha was the one who taught me how to identify constellations, bake the perfect blueberry scone, and find beauty in the wild, untamed chaos of a coastal garden. Then, when I was 22, the word dementia entered our lives. It started subtly. She'd forget a name, misplace her keys, or repeat a story she just told. My parents and her 2 brothers, my uncles Robert and Daniel, dismissed it as simple old age. But I saw the fear in my grandmother's eyes. I was the one she called in a panic when she couldn't remember how to get home from the grocery store she'd been going to for 50 years. The official diagnosis was a turning point. The doctors laid out the grim prognosis, a slow, irreversible decline. My mother and uncles held a family meeting. They discussed nursing homes, memory care facilities, the high cost of in-home care. It was all very practical, all very logical, but no one talked about what Martha would want. No one asked what it would feel like for this fiercely independent woman to be uprooted from the only home she'd ever loved. That night, I went to see my grandmother. She was sitting on her porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in strokes of orange and pink. "They want to put me in a home, don't they?" she asked me, her voice clear and lucid in that moment. "We're just exploring options, Grandma." She turned to me, her blue eyes sharp and full of a desperate plea. "Don't let them, Evie. Don't let them take me from my house. This is where your grandfather and I built our life. This is where I want to end it, please." Looking at her, at the woman who had been my constant, my anchor, I made a decision that would derail my entire life. I'd turned down the internship. I broke up with my boyfriend, who couldn't understand why I would throw away my future, and I moved into the small guest room of my grandmother's cottage. My family was relieved. My mother praised my selfless heart. My uncles called me a lifesaver, patting me on the back for taking on a burden they were all too happy to avoid. They promised to help, of course. They would send money, they would visit on weekends, they would give me breaks. Those promises, I soon learned, were as fleeting as my grandmother's short-term memory. The 7 years that followed were a long, slow lesson in isolation and loss. The financial support from my mother and uncles was sporadic at first, then dwindled to nothing. Their visits became shorter and less frequent, filled with awkward silences and quick glances at their watches. They couldn't handle the reality of their mother's decline. They preferred the memory of the sharp, witty woman she had been, not the confused, frightened person she was becoming. So, I was left to handle it alone. My days became a relentless cycle of caregiving. I learned to navigate the labyrinth of her fading mind, to answer the same question 20 times with the same patient tone, to gently guide her back to bed when she woke up convinced it was 1965 and she was late for a date with my grandfather. I became an expert in managing medications, changing adult diapers, and recognizing the subtle signs of a urinary tract infection, a common and dangerous issue for dementia patients. My friends stopped calling, their lives of travel, promotions, and weddings a world away from mine. My world had shrunk to the four walls of the seaside cottage. But there were moments of grace amidst the grief. Sometimes the fog in her mind would lift, and for a few precious minutes, my grandmother would be back. We'd sit on the porch, and she'd tell me stories about her childhood or ask about my designs, her eyes sparkling with their old intelligence. It was during one of these lucid moments that she made me a promise. "You've given up everything for me, Evie," she'd said, her hand frail but firm on mine. "I won't forget it. When I'm gone, this house, it's yours. It was always meant for someone who loved it, not just its price tag." I had dismissed it at the time as the ramblings of a confused mind, a sweet but empty promise. I wasn't doing this for a reward. I was doing it out of love. My cousins, however, saw my situation very differently. Robert's son Mark, a smug investment banker, would visit once a year and walk around the property, making comments about its development potential. Daniel's daughter, Sarah, a stay-at-home mom with 3 kids, would talk about how the cottage would be the perfect summer home for her family. They saw me not as a caregiver, but as a temporary house sitter, a placeholder until their rightful inheritance became available. They treated me with a kind of pitying condescension, the poor cousin who had failed to launch her own life. Grandma Martha passed away peacefully in her sleep one rainy spring morning, holding my hand. I was devastated, but I was also relieved that her long struggle was finally over. The funeral was a grand affair, orchestrated by my mother. All of my grandmother's friends and neighbors came, sharing stories of her kindness and wit. My uncles and their children stood at the front, looking appropriately somber. They all praised me in their eulogies, calling me an angel of mercy. Mark even hugged me, whispering, "You did a good thing, Evie. Now you can finally get on with your life." The implication was clear. My service was complete, and I could now step aside. The will reading was scheduled for a week later at the office of my grandmother's lawyer, Mr. Davison. The entire family was there. My mother, my uncles Robert and Daniel, and my 4 cousins. The atmosphere was of polite, restrained anticipation. They all assumed the estate would be divided equally among my grandmother's 3 children, who would then distribute a small token amount to me as a thank you for my service. I expected the same. I just hoped it would be enough to get a small apartment and restart my career. Mr. Davison, a kind, elderly man who had known my grandmother for decades, cleared his throat and began to read the will. The will was simple and direct. After a few small bequests to charities, he arrived at the main clause. "And as for my primary residence, the property known as Seacliff Cottage and its entire contents, along with the remainder of my financial assets, I leave it all, wholly and without encumbrance, to my beloved granddaughter, Evelyn Hayes." The silence in the room was absolute, a thick, suffocating blanket of shock. I could hear the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner, each second hammer blow against the stillness. My mother's face went pale, her polite smile frozen in place. Uncle Robert's jaw tightened, a muscle pulsing in his cheek. Uncle Daniel simply stared at Mr. Davidson as if he had started speaking in a foreign language. My cousin Mark was the first to break the silence. That's impossible," he stammered. "There must be a mistake." "There is no mistake," Mr. Davidson said calmly. "The will is perfectly clear, signed and witnessed. Your grandmother updated it 2 years ago. 2 years ago. That was right after one of her most lucid periods, a time when she had been crystal clear about her wishes. She knew exactly what she was doing. "This is outrageous," my mother finally exclaimed, finding her voice. "She took advantage of her. She manipulated a sick, confused old woman." The accusation, so swift and venomous, struck me like a physical blow. The saint, the angel, had become a thief in the span of 30 seconds. "Martha was my mother," Robert boomed, his face turning a blotchy red. "That house is our family legacy, built by our father. It belongs to us, her children." "She had every right to leave her property to whomever she wished," Mr. Davidson countered, his tone firm. "And she chose Evelyn. She was very specific about her reasons. She stated that Evelyn was the only one who had shown genuine, unconditional love and care, and the only one who valued the home for what it was, not what it was worth." The lawyer's words only added fuel to the fire. The room erupted. They turned on me, their grief for their mother instantly forgotten and replaced by a unified, white-hot rage. "How could you do this to us, Evie?" my cousin Sarah cried, tears of genuine anger streaming down her face. "We trusted you. We thought you were helping her, not robbing her blind." "I didn't ask for this," I said, my voice trembling. "I had no idea." "Oh, please," Mark sneered. "You played the long game, didn't you? 7 years of playing the martyr, all for this. I have to admit, it's a brilliant cold-blooded strategy." They saw my sacrifice not as an act of love, but as a calculated investment that had paid off. The 7 years I had lost, the future I had given up, in their eyes, it was all just a transaction. My mother, the woman who had praised my selflessness, now looked at me with pure contempt. "You are no longer welcome in my home," she said, her voice dripping with ice. "You have betrayed this family in the most despicable way possible. We will be contesting this will, I can promise you that. You will not get away with this." They stormed out of the office, leaving me alone with Mr. Davidson, shaken and heartbroken. My family, the people who were supposed to love me, now hated me. "I'm sorry you had to go through that," he said gently. "Your grandmother anticipated this. She knew they wouldn't understand." "Did I do the right thing?" I whispered, "moving in, taking care of her?" "You did a loving thing, Evelyn, and she has done her best to protect you. Which brings me to the second part of your inheritance." He slid a small, ornate brass key across the desk. "He said she left you this. It opens the old sea chest at the foot of her bed. She said you would know what to do with the contents. She said they were, and I quote, 'the truth that keeps the wolves from the door.'" I took the key, my mind numb. I had no idea what she meant. That night, I returned to the now empty cottage. The silence was heavier than ever, filled with the ghosts of my family's accusations. I went to her bedroom and found the old, heavy sea chest, a family heirloom that had supposedly belonged to my great-grandfather. With trembling hands, I unlocked it. It wasn't filled with treasure or old coins. It was filled with journals. Dozens of them, bound in worn leather, filled with my grandmother's elegant looping script. They spanned nearly 60 years of her life. At the very top was a note, written in a shake-your-hand, dated just a few months before she died. It read, "My dearest Evie, the truth is a heavy thing, but sometimes you must use its weight to keep from being crushed. Read these. You'll understand. Love, Grandma." I opened the first journal, dated 1958, the year she married my grandfather, the man everyone revered as a saint, a community hero, the rock of our family. I started to read, and with every page, the foundation of my family's history began to crack. The journals painted a picture of my grandfather, Arthur, that was utterly at odds with the family myth. To the world, he was a charismatic and successful local businessman, a deacon at his church, a man who organized charity drives and was beloved by all. In the private pages of my grandmother's journals, he was a different man entirely, a cold, controlling narcissist with a hidden gambling addiction and a cruel temper. The early entries were full of a young bride's love and hope, but a darker undertone quickly emerged. Arthur controlled every aspect of her life, from the money she was allowed for groceries to the friends she was permitted to see. He belittled her opinions, calling her simple and naive. He would fly into terrifying rages over trivial things, a misplaced shirt, a dinner that wasn't to his liking. My grandmother wrote about these episodes in a spare, factual way that was more chilling than any emotional outburst. Arthur was displeased tonight. A plate was broken. My arm will be bruised tomorrow, but I can cover it with a long sleeve. Then came the entries about the gambling. He would disappear for days at a time, coming back haggard and broke, full of promises to change that never materialized. He didn't go to casinos. His addiction was riskier, high-stakes, unregulated poker games with dangerous men. He lost their savings. He mortgaged their first home without her knowledge. He even sold a piece of jewelry her mother had given him, claiming it had been stolen. The most shocking revelation was about the business. The official story was that my grandfather had built his successful construction company from the ground up through hard work and integrity. The truth, carefully detailed in Martha's journals, was that the seed money for the business had been her inheritance, a significant sum from her parents that she had been forced to sign over to him. He had gambled most of it away. The business was on the brink of bankruptcy when my grandmother, using her sharp mind and quiet determination, stepped in. She secretly managed the books, negotiated with suppliers, and built relationships with clients behind his back, all while letting him take the public credit. She had saved the company and, by extension, the family's future, while he was praised as a business genius. I read through the night, my heart breaking for the lonely, terrifying life she had led, all hidden behind a facade of a perfect marriage. She had protected her children from the worst of it, ensuring they never knew the truth about the man they idolized. But she had paid a steep price, living in constant fear and anxiety. She wrote about her one act of rebellion. After Arthur had lost a particularly large sum of money, she had secretly begun siphoning off small amounts from the business profits, hiding it in a private account under her maiden name. It was her estate fund, a safety net she prayed she would never need. It is my money, after all. I am just taking back what was mine to begin with. My grandfather had died of a heart attack when I was 10. I remembered the funeral, the entire town turning out to mourn the loss of a great man. Reading these journals, I felt a cold fury. The man they were mourning was a fiction, a character my grandmother had helped create to protect her family. I finally understood why she had left me the house. It wasn't just a home. It was the one thing she had truly earned, the one piece of her life she had fought for and held onto. And she had left it to me, the one person she knew would understand its true value beyond the dollar signs. I also understood her final cryptic message. The journals were the truth, and it was time to use their weight. My phone rang, startling me from my reading. It was my cousin Mark. "Evie, I'm calling as a courtesy," he said, his voice smug. "We've retained a lawyer. We're filing the contest tomorrow. The grounds are undue influence and lack of testamentary capacity. Our lawyer says it's a slam dunk. We're going to prove that you took advantage of her dementia." "I wouldn't do that if I were you, Mark." He laughed. "Oh, I'm scared. What are you going to do?" "I'm going to have a family meeting," I said, my voice as cold as steel. "At the cottage. Tomorrow, at noon. Be there. And I suggest you come because I'm going to be reading from a collection of very interesting historical documents. You won't want to miss it." They arrived at the cottage just before noon, a unified army of the aggrieved. My mother, my uncles, and my cousins. They strode in with an air of righteous indignation. Their lawyer, a sharp-looking man named Mr. Peterson, by their side. They clearly saw this as a final negotiation, a chance for me to surrender before the inevitable legal battle. They found me in the living room. I was sitting in my grandmother's favorite armchair, a small table beside me. On the table was a stack of worn, leather-bound journals. "What is this, Evelyn? A dramatic reading?" my mother asked, her tone mocking. "Something like that," I replied. "Please, sit down." They remained standing, a silent act of intimidation. Their lawyer stepped forward. "Miss Hayes, my clients are here to offer you a final chance to resolve this amicably. They are prepared to offer you a 20% share of the estate in exchange for you dropping any claim to the rest. It is a very generous offer considering the strength of our legal position." "I'm sure it is," I said. "But before we discuss offers, I'd like to share some family history with you all. I think it will provide some context." I picked up the top journal. "This is my grandmother's journal. She began writing it the year she married Arthur. I'm sure you all have fond memories of Grandpa. A pillar of the community, wasn't he? A great man." I saw them exchange proud, knowing glances. This was the man whose legacy they were fighting to protect. "I'll start with an entry from 1961, I said, opening the book. "Arthur was displeased tonight. A plate was broken. My arm will be bruised tomorrow, but I can cover it with a long sleeve." The silence that followed was heavy and immediate. I saw a flicker of confusion on my mother's face. "What are you talking about? Dad would never—" "Oh, but he would," I said, turning a few pages. "Here's another, from 1963. Arthur lost the mortgage money in a poker game again. He promised it was the last time, the same promise he made last month. I had to sell the last of my mother's jewelry to cover it." I looked up at my uncles. "You always wondered why Grandma never had any family heirlooms to pass down? Now you know." "This is slander," Uncle Robert roared. "You are desecrating our father's memory with these fabricated stories?" I asked. "Fabricated? Her handwriting looks pretty real to me. But let's move on to something more substantial. The family business." I picked up another journal. "The official story is that Grandpa built his company from nothing. The truth is, the startup money was Grandma's inheritance, which he gambled away. The only reason the company survived its first 5 years is because she secretly managed the finances, all while he was taking the credit and being praised as a local hero. It's all here. Dates, names, account ledgers she kept by hand." I could see their lawyer, Mr. Peterson, was starting to look uneasy. This was not the simple case of a confused old woman he would been sold. "So you see," I continued, my voice gaining strength, "this family's wealth, the very foundation of the comfortable lives you have all led, was built not by the man you all idolize, but by the woman you are now trying to paint as a senile old fool. It was built on her silent sacrifice, her secret work, and her endurance of a life of fear and control." I let that sink in before delivering the final blow. She left me this house because it was the only thing that was truly hers. She bought it with money she had to secretly save, money she earned by saving the business he nearly destroyed. Leaving it to her children would have meant leaving it to his children, the children of the man who made her life a private hell. She couldn't do that. She left it to me because I was the only one who loved her for herself, not for what she provided. No one spoke. My cousins looked at their parents, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and dawning horror. My uncles stared at the floor, their faces ashen. My mother had sunk into a chair, her hands covering her face. "These are the private writings of a woman who may have been suffering from delusions," their lawyer finally said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Are you willing to bet your clients' reputations on that? Are you willing to have these journals entered as evidence in a public court case? Are you prepared for the front page of the local newspaper to run a story titled 'Local Hero, Arthur Hayes, a secret life of abuse and deceit? Think of your client's social standing, their business connections in this town that adored him. I stood up and walked over to the fireplace, where a fire was crackling softly. "So here is my counteroffer," I said, holding one of the journals over the flames. "You drop the lawsuit. You walk away and never mention this again. In return, this secret stays within these walls. This family's pristine, fraudulent legacy remains intact. But if you proceed, I will burn it all down. Metaphorically, of course. I will release every page of these journals to the press. Your father's name will be mud. And by extension, so will yours. The choice is yours." The room remained utterly still. The only sound was the crackling of the fire and the distant cry of a seagull. My family stared at me, then at the journal in my hand, then at each other. The mask of righteous anger had been replaced by the pale, ugly face of fear. They weren't afraid of losing the lawsuit anymore. They were afraid of winning it. They were afraid of the truth. Their lawyer, Mr. Peterson, was the first to grasp the full gravity of the situation. He recognized a checkmate when he saw one. He cleared his throat and spoke to my uncles and mother in a low, urgent tone. "We should discuss this privately." He ushered his stunned clients out onto the porch, their earlier confidence completely evaporated. I could hear their muffled, frantic whispers through the closed door. It didn't take long. 10 minutes later, they filed back into the room. Their faces were grim, their posture defeated. My mother wouldn't look at me. Uncle Robert, who had been the most belligerent, now looked like a broken man. Mr. Peterson spoke, his professional demeanor a thin veil over his own shock. "My clients have decided to honor their final wishes. The legal contest will be withdrawn immediately." "A wise decision," I said, placing the journal back on the table. They turned to leave, a silent, shuffling retreat. My mother paused at the door, her back to me. "All those years," she whispered, her voice choked with a pain that felt real. "I had no idea. We had no idea." "I know," I said. "That was the point. She protected you." And with that, they were gone. I stood in the quiet living room, the journals sitting on the table like sleeping dragons. I hadn't won a victory. I had just survived a war. The truth hadn't set anyone free. It had just recaged them in a different kind of prison, the prison of a tarnished legacy. The weeks that followed were quiet, the legal papers were signed, and the estate was officially transferred to my name. I received a single formal letter of apology from my mother, a stilted, awkward note that said more about her own grief and confusion than any real remorse for her actions toward me. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. I spent my time in the cottage, not renovating or redecorating, but simply being. I walked on the beach, I worked in the garden my grandmother had loved, and I read through the rest of her journals. It was a painful, illuminating process. I was learning about her life, but I was also learning about generational trauma, about the secrets families keep, and about the quiet strength it takes to endure the unendurable. One afternoon, while cleaning out a closet, I found a box of my old landscape architecture designs from college. I spread them out on the dining room table, and for the first time in 7 years, I felt a flicker of the passion I thought I had lost forever. The cottage and its wild, beautiful grounds were the ultimate project. I started sketching not plans to increase its market value, but plans to honor its spirit, to create a space of peace and healing. I established a small, private foundation in my grandmother's name, dedicated to providing respite care for families of dementia patients. I used a portion of the estate to hire a team of wonderful in-home caregivers, offering their services for free to families in the community who couldn't afford a break. The cottage itself, I decided, would one day become a retreat, a place where caregivers could come for a weekend to rest, recharge, and walk by the sea. My family has kept their distance. The secret of my grandfather is a wall between us, a truth that they cannot bear to acknowledge. They are still part of the community, still living under the shadow of a name that feels like a lie to them now. We don't speak, but I know they are watching. Perhaps one day we will be able to talk again, not as adversaries or as the children of a broken hero, but just as people, flawed and human. But for now, the silence is a necessary piece. My life is quiet, but it is not empty.
It is filled with the purpose my grandmother gave me. I am the keeper of her home, the guardian of her truth, and the executor of her real legacy, one not of money or property, but of quiet resilience and the fierce, enduring power of a woman's love. Have you ever discovered a family secret that changed everything you thought you knew? How did it affect your view of your family and yourself? Share your stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit like and subscribe to hear more stories about the complex truths that lie hidden in every family. Remember to share this video with someone who might appreciate a story about finding strength in the truth, no matter how difficult it is. Thank you for listening, and may you always have the courage to face your own history.